Hello and welcome to my first YouTube video. My name is Zach. I've been repairing watches for all of my adult life and live streaming some of these repairs for the last 6 or so years. The watch we have here tonight is very unique, very special, very rare, and little is known about it. In fact, here's some of the things we do know about it, but it's kind of just a drop in the bucket. So if you guys know anything about this watch or any details, any specifics, literally anything at all, please feel free to let us know down below or give us your thoughts on it. And yeah, we'll get right to it here. Without further ado, here is the Seiko Imperial VFA. This is part one of probably 3 in a series of this watch in particular. So stick around and we'll see you soon. Today's the day. We've got crystal in from Spain. And I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see if it's the right one. What should we open up first? The watch or the crystal? Let's open up the crystal. Okay, let's get some finger cuts. Need a little grit. Almost doesn't count as a drop. Doesn't count. All right, let's do this. Okay. The moment we've all been waiting for. Seiko Imperial. It heard its name spoken and it started running. All right, first I want to look at the bevel. It might be spot on. It just might be spot on. Shall we take a peek under the hood? Let's see here. Engine, I think I finally got a watch tool that I don't have. What'd you get? There's a lot of tools that I want that I don't have. Am I gonna get tool envy? This is a little bit grimy. This is, just a retainer spring that kind of holds things in place. There is some service marks. (1977) and 1982, done by the same person. there's an E in the middle. It's a different E than the ones that are written up here. Kind of odd looking. Let's see if we can see it with this camera. So there you can see 377 and 482. But then there's a little E down here. Really nice perlage though. Wouldn't you guys agree? It's kind of mesmerizing. I'm typically a fan of like teeny tiny little perlage, like when the diameter of the circles themselves are really kind of tiny, but this is just a case back, right? No, it's well done, well spaced. 9 times out of 10, these things are done by hand. There's just one big slip here. The screw heads all look pretty good. This one, I'm not sure what they did. Ah, okay. Either this one's loose, or it's possible this isn't the right screw. This one here is dang near flush with the surface of the bridge itself. This one is riding high. There's an interesting concavity here. I thought maybe, well, it might be just a bit too tight, but I don't know, that's something we'll take a look at too. But yeah, somebody was going to unwind the mainspring here, and they slipped pretty aggressively. Okay, now that I'm looking at the screw heads, it's possibly they're just mixed up. See, this is a short one, so it's possible that these two screws are mismatched. Actually, I think that's the most likely explanation here, because the rest of the screw heads are nice and flush. This one is sunk in, this one's sticking out. So this probably has a shorter head on it, and this one has a longer one. So a bridge screw is mixed up with a balanced bridge screw. Would have been some European dignitary, more than likely. Sadly, we don't know who. Mabula never knew a Japanese emperor had left the island in their entire history. Yeah. Has any left since Hirohito? Was it his son that abdicated? Naruhito. So probably grandson, I guess. Hey, Corvus. Maybe not Naruhito. He's only been emperor since 2019. What? Wrong screw? I think it's just mismatched. So if you take a look at this screw right here, it's sunk in. And then when you take a look at this one, it's sticking out. And all the other ones look perfectly flush. But you can see that concavity on the crown wheel there, the plate for the crown wheel. Curious to see what's going on there. Screws messed up, terrible, just toss the watch out. I mean, I'll toss it for you. You heard it, chat. She's giving it to my bin. Hey, Bluesy. Since it's a known Seiko movement, I'm sure there's an expert you can ask that would be certain. Yeah, I mean, what's going to happen is we're going to take it apart. That's what's going to happen. Meaning this watch has been serviced since leaving Showa's hands. Yeah, there's 2 service marks, possibly 3. I'm not sure what the E is, or even if it's an E, it could just be a symbol. 1977 and 1982. But then there's a tiny little E there. And it's pretty clear that it was done by somebody else's hand. The top 2 are done from the same person. Let's see if I can get an angle where there's no glare. See, if you look at those E's, they're slightly different than this one. Now, it's possible that it could be from the original person. Maybe they had started to write their mark in the middle and then realized that that was a bad idea, and then they went up here. But I don't think that's the case, because if you look, the consistency and depth of their scribe mark, of the service mark, seemingly isn't as aggressive, or as big. Like, this one's deep. It might be hard to tell with this camera, but it's deep and it just looks different. Let's say that. They carved service marks into it. To be fair, they probably didn't know what it was they were working on. There is a likelihood of that. Or maybe they did, who knows? Mbula, wonder what the value of the watch would be? It's a great question. I don't think there's enough of them out there, or that, they've sold enough to really get a good grasp on that. Rogue 7782, the watch would have been given in 71, so it's likely those services were done on behalf of the person the watch was given to. Yeah, we don't really know though. Maybe they gave the watch to somebody else. Be kind of strange though, wouldn't it? The Emperor is just like, thank you so much for helping me, and gives you something and you're like, it's just a Seiko. You just give it to a friend like, oh yeah, guess what? Guess who gave me this one? You just don't know. One of the things I was trying to do was track down that watchmaker, but unsurprisingly got no hits. Yeah, see, that's really an interesting thing, because watchmakers have, you know, a signature. They have their own identifier that lets them know. I'd say 9 times out of 10, you know. Sometimes it's just a string of numbers and there is no discernible rhyme or reason to those numbers. So in those cases, they're typically factory job numbers. What's my opinion on etched service marks? Current consensus is that it should never be done, but clearly used to be a standard practice. Yeah, I mean, I still do it, unless the customer lets me know that please don't do that. In that case, then I don't. But my opinion on it is that it's history. What's done now is they do it with Sharpie. And guess what? You go to clean it and that Sharpie comes off. So how far does that history go? We've worked on pocket watches where the entire case back was filled up with service marks. Some of them done very respectably. We've seen somebody like, you know, Fred was here, like all across the entire case back. And that's not the way to do it. In my mind, and the way that I do it so small that you wouldn't really even be able to see it with the naked eye. It would look like a smudge. And, you know, it's just there so that when the watch comes back to me, I see it and I realize, hey, I worked on this 5 years ago. I worked on this 10 years ago, you know. At some point, I'm gonna be working on watches and like, hey, look at that. I worked on this 50 years ago. However, there are certain circumstances where I wouldn't. Like I don't need to have a service mark on there to know. I promise I'll remember you servicing this. I'm gonna remember this for the rest of my life. Thank you for the opportunity, Corvus. I honestly can't tell you how many watches I've worked on where I was on the surface of the moon. Like mentally, I was just gone, you know? I was being a space cadet. And that's what happens sometimes. Sometimes working at the bench, it can be very meditative. It can be very, I guess in some ways, out of body. Like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I do some of my best thinking when I'm busy. So I could be driving, and then all of a sudden I'm at my destination, and I'm like, how did those hours go by? Or I'll be cleaning, like literally just cleaning, you know, sweeping, mopping, dishes, whatever, and the hands are moving, but I'm not thinking about that, you know, I'm not focusing on that. So it's similar in a sense with watches where sometimes I'm just not present. Okay, so let's get a look at a couple of things under the scope. And then we'll verify the crystal. I think the bevel on this one I think the crystal might be just slightly taller. But if that's the only difference, I think we're okay. All the Omegas are U.S. government property. Those aren't in public hands. I think a lot of those astronauts like kept their watches, you know? Let's turn the polarizer off. Couple of scuffs and scratches on the jewel retainer, jewel spring. I guess I should put that in the title. Caliber 40, 4580. Yeah, you see that little dish in the middle there? I wonder if those screws are just like too tight. And there you see the only real big slip on the watch. So how does this happen? This happened from a watchmaker that was unwinding the watch. They were unwinding it, and they were probably using a screwdriver or tweezers, and they slipped. Here's the thing though, you don't need to use something metal to do that. So you use a piece of plastic, you use a piece of pegwood, you know, that way if you slip, you're not going to scratch. Okay, so that's the screw that's riding high, and where did it go? I think that's the one that's riding low. Yeah. So what I suspect is that those two screws just need to be swapped. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. We'll get the stem out. And actually before that, we'll just unwind it, make sure that it's fully unwound. I suspect there's not much power in it currently. All right, let's just sample our mainspring. Yeah, it's pretty low. Let me get the band off first. It's a little bit awkward. And maybe a pointier pegwood. No, I think we got the power out. Let's just verify. No more power. There might be a slight bend in the stem, and there's a little bit of wear on it. I think once I clean it up, I want to study it a little bit. But let me show you the wear. Let's turn the polarizer on. As far as I know, no one knows what the original strap looked like. Man. There's just so many questions about it, you know? Okay, I'm gonna take the retainer ring off here. Because there's less risk. When you have the movement out of the watch, I would say there's more risk in damaging the dial. Don't like that screwdriver. I like that one. So if you notice, I loosened one a little bit first. The purpose of that is these case clamps put tension on the movement in the dial. So if you completely unscrew one first, sometimes it can really make the other side very tight. So when you just loosen it up first, makes things just a little easier on the other side. Okay, now let's get the bezel off. And you see there's a little slot there. A little indentation. And that's what's provided to us. Careful with the dial. Yeah. Let's take a look at it. I think it's a little grimy. Yeah, I think it's just a little schmutzy. When we get the dial off, we'll get it under the scope and take a good look at it. The hands either have some oil damage or some moisture damage. And there's one indice, actually the number 1 indice, which has a little bit of bubbling. The bubbling is from the plating lifting. Okay, let's check out our crystal before we dive into the movement. You're gonna kill me not covering up the dial. We need to get it off, and honestly, I think it needs a little cleaning. There's some grime around the edges. A little bit of schmutz needs to be blown off. I can't tell if what I'm seeing over here is moisture damage or if it was oil damage. The outside edge is kind of rough. It's not something that you would see. Here, let's make Corvus feel better. Let's give it a quick buff. Rogue, I'm tempted to get into taking apart and putting watches together again as a hobby. But this, knowing this watch's story, wouldn't even want risk touching this at all. Well, that's what I'm here for. Using a citizen tool on a Seiko watch. Blasphemy. Oh, yeah, it already started lifting. That's a great sign. You know what that means, right? It means it's well made. Beautiful. A little bit of grime. Let me show you. So what I'm looking at is the gap that's forming. You can see like it's lifting up. If you're not familiar with this kind of work, it might seem odd taking a hammer to a watch, you know? Okay, it's still coming up. Still coming up. There it is. And that's our bezel. So you might think, wouldn't you want to put it in a tool and then lever it? That would be a mistake, in my mind. This technique is something that I've polished with thousands of watches. So I have experience with lifting bezels and case backs for that matter. Now, I don't trust the lever tools because I've had bad experiences with lever tools. So if lever tools is the way you go, by all means, more power to you. For me, this is far more controlled, far more gentle, and far less likely to damage the watch. So that's just, that's my watchmaker take. Corvus, I'll say there's very few watchmakers out there who are willing to have such a connection to their clients that they make bringing a watch back to life a collaborative experience. I enjoy it. Something special about Mr. H and why I trusted this watch to him. Thank you, Corvus. It's an honor and a pleasure. And because we're together seeing it all happen, I know that nothing, yeah, see? I think there's a lot of value in this. Being able to, you're not taking your watch to somebody and then it disappears behind a room and you don't know what happens to it. Like, that's something where it's like, imagine if, okay, the car analogies, I should just learn something else that's like, I need to have other hobbies. But imagine you take your car to a shop, right? And they don't have a window there where you can see your car. That would be kind of strange, right? Or you're not allowed to like peer into the shop, you know? That's how I feel it's like with a lot of jewelry stores and watchmaker places, you know, that there's a front desk and then you can't go into the back room, you know? It's one of those things. Whereas this, I feel like this is, I don't know, just a completely different thing. Let's get that gasket off. So it is common for bezels to trap grime. So again, if this hasn't been serviced since 1982, this level of grime would suggest to me that this wasn't worn a whole lot. Like, you couldn't really see this from the outside. So there's little voids that hide grime. You know, like if you were to look at your own watches, you would probably see some grime stuck in the lugs, you know. I think it had an expansion band on it. Yeah, it had an expansion band. There was a twist-a-flex on this here watch. So, this is telling. This is telling. This suggests that it was worn by somebody who liked the convenience of being able to just pull it on and pull it off, you know? So this sort of wear is really common with older watches. The thing about the expansion bands, the ones that are stretchy, is that more often than not, they're kind of like a one-size-fits-all sort of deal. So the band ends themselves will be actively pushing against the lugs. That may or may not have been the case here. I suspect it is because there's a high point. The high point's around the spring bar. This one is probably the worst. And we've seen watches that were so bad that it completely chewed the lug away. So having that active spring pressure against those lugs, when you're wearing it, it's constantly grinding away at that lug. So if this were, say, a gold watch, you know, it would really chew through it pretty quickly. But luckily it's a steel one. Okay. So if you remember from yesterday, I was talking about this metal plate, this metal crystal ring. They made all kinds of different styles and types of these. So we can take a look at my King Seiko, but before we do, I think we're in good shape. I think we're in good shape. This is it. This is the crystal we needed. I think there's 0.1 of a mil difference between the thickness on the crystal. So remember how I brought those whites crystals out yesterday to show the dome? Yeah, these have less of a dome than the whites crystals do. So if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't even realize that this wasn't a flat top crystal. The dome on it is so minimal. Both mineral glass, yeah. So if you're looking for a crystal for your Seiko Imperial, here's the part number. Oh, man. Okay, I actually want to verify that if there is a 0.1 of a mil difference, because this one seems to be just ever so slightly thicker. The glass itself, not the metal ring. So we've got 4.1. And we've got 4.0. Okay. Remember how I told you that my eye is tuned to the 10th of a millimeter? There's your proof. All right. For the doubters. That is great. That's awesome. I was afraid that this was going to be far too thick. If you ever see another one, grab it for me, because who knows when we'll need a second. Oh man, I'm loving the thought that you're gonna have some wrist time with this. That's so cool. 300V, yeah, so they're rare. They're hard to come by and they're very expensive. If this was just a stand, like there's other Seikos that have this style of crystal, you're looking at, you know, like 20 bucks. But this one, because it is so rare and because it was used for higher end Seiko, there's not a lot of them out there, and the people that have them know that there's not a lot of them out there. Yeah, I'll pick one up also in case I get my own Imperial Seiko. Smart. Okay, I saw a comment about the whites crystals, about how the glass itself was slightly different hue. I don't know how I would be able to show that. But yeah, the dome on this is a good deal higher. Like you can feel the dome, like pretty readily, pretty easily, and you can see the dome. It's pretty obvious. Whereas the Seiko one, I mean, if I were just looking at it with the naked eye, it's very hard to tell that it actually has a dome to it. I find it fun and interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a watch nerd. This possibility, you know? Rogue, there are many more, of course, but the vast majority are probably locked up in government royal vaults across Europe. I don't know if there's many more. And I would think, usually when foreign dignitaries, emperors, presidents, when they make, you know, a voyage to other countries, when they do give gifts, it's very publicly known. I would imagine there were gifts given to foreign governments, heads of state, that weren't watches. They were probably something else, you know? These ones were meant, at least I suspect, for people that weren't so, maybe out in the public. Maybe they were just people, I don't actually know. But I suspect that, you know, the heads of state got something else. And that's a very, you know, that's probably in museums where people can view it, that sort of thing. But I don't actually know. and wear all my watches. I like that. It's something where I don't really understand collectors that don't. I mean, I guess I understand it. It's just like it's a brain thing, you know, where it's like they. So there's car collectors all over the world that just keep their cars parked in the garages. They don't actually drive them. That just boggles my mind. Similar with watches. There's a lot of watch collectors out there that the watches just sit in safety deposit boxes and safes, and they never see the light of day. Handlers, ambassadors, yeah, I think so. We have credible estimates that fewer than 100 4580 7010s were made. I would imagine these would be significantly smaller quantity than those. Yeah, I'm with you there. LBJ gave out hundreds of Vulcan cricket watches out as gifts. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I believe that's one of the reasons why they still hold their value. There's a theory that they were given to people who helped the emperor during his trip. We know at least one was given to a German diplomat, not a head of state. I find that to be way more interesting and personal. Don't you guys? Because it's expected that, you know, there's an exchange of gifts between the heads of state. Like, that's just something that's just sort of like, yeah, that happens all the time. But these were much more personal, you know, they were given as a thank you. I find that very wholesome. I know some collecting, like comic books, loses value as soon as it's outside a sealed bag, so maybe people might not wear a watch for fear of harming. Yeah, I mean, of course. Of course. They don't drive the vehicles because the more miles on the vehicles means it's going to have less monetary value, right? But the whole point of the vehicle is to be driven. That's the thing. The whole point of the comic book is to be read. In the sense of the comic book, you can just, there's scanned examples of it if you want to read it, right? There's ones that are beat up that you can flip through, so you don't have to, like, you know, read the one that's sealed up. Rogue, I wonder what he gave to the late Queen Elizabeth II. I'll bet you if you take a palace tour, you could probably ask somebody. You gotta make sure your gift is something a head of state would actually want. I mean, not really. It could just be a joke. Okay, the case is gonna need a good cleaning. I'll be sure to polish the lugs away. Just FYI, chat, we don't polish lugs here. We don't polish cases here. I usually let the customer know when they ask for it. Just like, hey, you know, this is really gonna, every time you polish something, you're removing material. So you're really like taking away from the watch. 9 times out of 10, they get it. They're like, oh, I didn't realize. Then no, don't do that. So, but it's that 1 out of 10 that's like, oh yeah, I know. I just want it to look shiny. And it's like, fair enough. I'll get it shiny for you. You know, it's one of those things. Anyway, I'm excited that we got the right crystal. The gasket's really in good shape. Okay, I got the go-ahead. We're gonna polish it. All right, let's tune up my screwdrivers. Actually, no, I'm gonna hold off on that. We're gonna pull the hands and dial. Yeah, the hour hand looks oily. And what I'm looking at on the second hand and minute hand looks like spots. But that's with a loop on, you know? Like if you're just looking at this on the wrist, you would not see a thing. But to me, these are indications that we might have a watch that's over-oiled. Surprise, surprise. I wonder if this is a stem issue. There's something strange happening here. It might be a yoke spring. We'll know more once we get the dial off. See, I'm not in the setting position. I'm actually in the winding position. But when you wiggle the crown, the minute hand moves. See, I'm ratcheting it back. And if I go forward, I'm winding. I feel the tension of the mainspring. So it's slightly... it's a clutch wheel. The clutch wheel is engaging with the setting gear, but it shouldn't be. Okay. Dial-O-Matic 9000. It's coming back. I'm thinking about triple layering it. What I would like to do is get one in between the hour and the minute hand. And the reason for that is because there's paint on the hour hand. Paint on the minute hand too, but just on the top side. Presto tool with this dial? Oh, you know it. Oh man. No, I want clear. The reason I'm kind of being OCD about this is because of the oil. The oil that's on the hour hand. The paint could easily get damaged. Just from the hands coming in contact with each other. So that's why I'm separating and triple layering. And then the one on top is because sometimes the second hand is very tight. Sometimes when a lot of times the hour hand and the minute hand will come very smoothly and easily. But then the second hand, they're all press fit. But more often than not, the second hand shaft is tapered. Sometimes the shaft is tapered, sometimes the sleeve that goes on top of it is tapered as well, and they can really lock in tight. So the one on top is mainly just to prevent it from jumping. Sometimes they will jump up and off and go flying. Did you hear that little noise? It was like that was the second hand. Okay, let's put the hands away and we'll get the dial off and put the dial away. Pressed into the dial, isn't it? Or is it just drawn into it? Hang on, I missed what was said before. So there's a huge question around what the flower emblem is made with. Different than the other black painting, for sure. Yeah, it's like a gold. It's really nice. Once we get the dial off, we'll take a look at it. Yeah, there's some oil smudges on the hands. Some of it I can get off, but some of it's permanent. I don't think it was moisture. There's a tool mark on the hour hand. Kind of looks like a Presto tool. Just saying. Just saying. See it's got the signature lines on both sides. Ouch. It's not something that you would see with it on the wrist. It really isn't. I mean, unless you were looking at it with a loop, then you might see the tail end of that scratch. Hard life. No, I don't know. We'll see. We've only seen the back side of the movement. We're getting ready to see the dial side. Ah, this is interesting. Take a look at this dial screw. Large and in charge, right? It's not polished, but hey, it's a dial screw, right? Now look at this one. Small and polished. Tool mark's terrible, just toss the watch. You know, mismatched screws, toss the watch, that's just it. We're at that point. Do I even bother taking the dial off? Yep. It's a wash. That one was snug. Hmm. Yeah, this polish screw isn't the right screw for the job, I don't think. I can feel that the threads are just... It doesn't feel right. We're going to compare the two screws. Normally you don't need to remove dial screws. You just loosen them up, and they're just there to put pressure on the dial feet. That might be a Swiss screw. Yeah, normally you don't need to remove them. You loosen them up, you get the dial off, and then you tighten it back down. Now this one, the screw itself feels much better. Also, it's a cheesehead screw. I think that's what this style is called. So you notice that it's got a conical taper to it. This is what you would want for a dial screw. You wouldn't want one that has a flat head, like so. So we'll be trying to match this one over here. This one just makes more sense. And the thread was spot on. Okay, so this side, the dial foot is totally free. This side, it gets hung up, and it might be because of that mismatched screw. The reason I say that is because if you look at this foot, you can tell where the screw itself had been pressing into it. So it left a burnished area. So the screw pushed the soft metal of the dial foot away to the point where it's a little, there's some resistance with it coming up and out. There we go. Okay, it's much smoother now. Just needed a little bit of coaxing. Okay, at this point, should just slide right out. Yeah, I mean, just standard dial. It's just a Seiko, chat. Nothing to see here. I would try to take something apart and the spring would launch into the unknown. It's happened. We've done it. Any watchmaker that tells you that he hasn't launched a spring into orbit is probably lying to you. Always let down the mainspring before taking off anything connected to it, and you'll lower the risk tremendously. It's not typically the mainspring that would really be of... But yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right. A lot of times it's these yoke springs that sometimes will get away from you. You know, dial side is really... Nothing really, you know, jumps out. There's some fog of old oil, but it's not dripping. This is good. As for the other smaller springs, they fly off to join the Swiss space program. Yeah. Launching a spring across the room is a rite of passage, though. Happens to everyone at least once, as well as breaking a crystal. Yeah. Bluesy, does that say Seiko 5? Rozzy, nothing has ever been dropped or launched on this stream. See? See? Longtime viewer. Watched every single stream. Okay, so I'm curious as to why our setting system was slightly engaged. So we'll get into it. But before we do, let's take a look at this dial. There was an indice, number 1 indice, where there was some bubbling. The chrome itself slightly bubbled. But that's really it. Just a little bit of grime around the edges. No damage, really. No tool marks. It's really nice, you know? The last 2 watches we worked on, no real dial damage to speak of. Does the good dial screw appear to match this? Yeah. Yeah. Corvus, I probably have one of those. I might even have one sitting on the bench. There. That's it. Oh, there we go. There you can see the bubbles. I have to get that glare back. There it is. So if you're just looking at it like this, you can't really tell what it is we're looking at. But when you rotate it, you see that they actually lift out. They bubble out. Now, I don't really think that this was caused by anything except for maybe just the plating process. Yeah, that's kind of all I can really fathom. If this was, you know, heavily oil laden, that could be a culprit. I just can't see that some oil just got on this one indice, you know? It just seems a little far-fetched. And there you see a very subtle linen. It's really nice. So now you're saying the Emperor gives gifts with bum indices? No comment. Please don't come after me or my family. Alright, so I think I suspect I know what happens. I want to get the stem back in to see if I can recreate the symptom, the issue. I might not. I might not be able to. Ah, no, I can. How interesting. I'm not sure yet, but it might be because there is a slight bend to the stem. Might. Take a look. So, normally when you go to set the watch, the clutch wheel engages with the set gear, just like that. And then you push it back in, and it pops away. But there's still wiggle room in the set gear. What's going on? Let's get a little closer. Okay, maybe too close. I think the bottom of the stem, or the slight bend in the stem, see, it doesn't happen on these sides, but just this one side, right here. And there again, not every time, right? So it's an intermittent contact. It might just be when the setting gear is in a certain position, and then once you get past it, it doesn't contact. Ooh, spooky. That one kind of had a mind of its own. Get him, Corvus. All right, we need to do a little more investigation. We need to see what's really going on here. Spooky, explain. We need to get out our paranormal measuring devices. You know, it could just be as simple as the set gear is upside down. That's it, I think. It could just be upside down. Remember how we went over it before, relatively recently? Where if you put a watch back to, if you feel the setting of a watch is nice and smooth, then you take it apart, put it back together, and then you feel the setting of the watch is off. It doesn't feel the same. It feels notchy, or it doesn't feel smooth anymore. It could just be that set gear is upside down. Sometimes they look perfectly symmetrical. Sometimes they have a slight bevel on the edge of the gear itself. But what ends up happening is, as a gear train is run, it has its own wear characteristics. It has its own little signature. The teeth will mesh in a certain way where the edges will get burnished in such a fashion that it's no longer perfectly symmetrical. We need a Shinto priest. We need a young priest and an old priest. Okay, so I want to take this bridge off here, just to see a little bit more of what's going on here. So let's get it in a movement holder. Okay, so I know I say it a lot, but I think it's something that needs to be repeated. It's one of those things where sometimes people rush it, or they're not fully present and cognizant of what's going on. They're just thinking, we'll just get it in the holder and crank it down. I always recommend to go slow with it and check it out. Check it out and double check that you're not putting pressure on anything that doesn't like to have pressure put on it. So like, for example, I mean, obviously the balance wheel would be the big one, right? You don't want to have a pressure point on your balance wheel. But some things that might not be so obvious is the teeth on the mainspring. Sometimes you might just think, oh, well, it's fine. And it might be, but is it worth risking damaging teeth for an assumption? I would say no. It's not. So just remember that you tighten it down in the movement holder. Just double and triple check that all the pressure points on the movement holder are in an area where it's not going to hurt anything. There, see? That's totally fine. Whereas before, had I cranked it down where it was, it would have put a lot, potentially too much pressure. Potentially too much pressure on that barrel. You gotta remember, they might look like they're steel, but they're most likely brass. This decoration's interesting. I would say it's almost like a mill. Like a, maybe a sweep cutter. When it was milled, maybe they used a sweep cutter. I don't know. Any machinists in chat? Engine, there. Fly cutter. I think that's what I was trying to come up with. So, an end mill can have multiple different cutting heads on it, right? A fly cutter typically just has one. So, you'll have like say like a central chuck that holds the fly cutter in place. And then something like a boring bar, or just, you know, a rod that will hold the cutting head. Whereas an end mill, a lot of times they're fluted, they look very ornate, they look very expensive. In this case, I don't know. I don't think that's the case, because it would have a uniformity to it. Whereas this one, the gaps over at this end are larger than the gaps over at this end. I would think if it was a fly cutter, there would be uniformity, unless they had this off center when they were doing the sweeping cut. Because it has sort of like a clamshell effect to it, where it tapers down into a certain area, right? I have a large router and a Dremel with mad amount of different grindy boys to switch out. What type of cutters are those? They would most likely be used on a milling machine. So the movement would be affixed in a vise, probably a little more substantial than this, and then held onto a large bed, whether it be a lathe bed or an actual milling machine bed, to hold the vise in place. And then you would have your motor, which you can articulate the angle from. This is pretty rudimentary the way I'm explaining it. And then you would have different inserts that you could put into the motor. Different chucks, different tools, all kinds of different cutting equipment. And yeah, that's most likely what was used here. But this might have been done offset. I don't know. I'm super fascinated with machining, and I really want to get into it more. A lot of times mills, at least purpose-built mills, what I want to get for my lathe is a milling attachment. That's just different. You're taking a tool and then making a tool that does a specific purpose for it. Whereas most mills are, maybe not most, I'm just sort of going out on a limb here, are purpose-built as a mill specifically. So they're going to be configured in such a way that's, you know, a lot of times much more versatile than a milling attachment is what I would be looking for. But a lot of mills can be very large, very heavy, and very, very powerful. So the beauty of that is you can get a lot of torque. So you can run the tool very, very slowly and it will cut. Whereas something like this, which is just a tiny little WW lathe, you wouldn't really be able to get torque with it. What I'm talking about is this is like 1/10 of a horsepower, whereas a milling machine could be 3, 4, 5, 10 horsepower, like a huge, huge motor. But something like this is brass, so you don't really need a huge amount of torque to cut brass. Okay, let's take a quick break. Is my camera a little off? Okay, stretch your legs and we'll get this set bridge off. I guess it would be a minute wheel bridge. I want to take a look at the set gears there. It's only fair.
Drop.
Never seen before Imperial on eBay or another popular place. We've only seen this one. Yeah. Me all excited about my Rattrapant. All right, let's see how that looks. Beautiful. I'm just gonna take that feathered edge off. Nice. Perfect. Just what I want. You can see on this one where somebody didn't take the time to do that. And you see that it just took a couple of minutes. Oh, my sisters are here. I'm gonna go give them a hug. Ah, okay. I think it was the right side, but here you can see the bevel that I was talking about. There's a slight bevel on the gear itself, and it's flat on one side and beveled on the other. But it looked like it was in the correct orientation. There's a little bit of wear on the post, but that's always really standard. Let's see if we can recreate the issue. Oh, I get it. It's way more simpler than any of that. I suspect it only does this when it's unwound. The movement's not happening from the set gear. The movement's happening, well, it stems from the mainspring. So we're currently, the winding pinion right there is engaged with the crown wheel on the other side, which is engaged with the ratchet wheel, which is engaged with the mainspring, which the mainspring is engaged with the center wheel. So it's taken the long way around. I'll bet you if we were to wind this up, it wouldn't do this. See that? The set gear is not even moving, but everything else is. But we couldn't see that, really. So it's actually a non-issue. It's actually a non-issue. There's just enough play in the system where it can happen like that. The thing is, under normal conditions, the mainspring never really gets fully unwound. Why is that? Well, there's resistance in the gear train, and the balance assembly takes power to continue turning, to continue oscillating. So at a certain point, there's just not enough power to deliver, you know, a proper cycle for the balance wheel. So even when the watch had stopped, there was still a little bit of power in the mainspring, right? But what happens when you take all of that power out? Now the mainspring has the ability to slightly shift. Whereas before, with a little bit of tension in the spring, it wouldn't shift. Okay, let me go give my sisters a hug, and I'll be right back. Okay, let's get back to it. Oh, whatever. Wasn't my thumb one. I keep talking about it. One of these days I'll just get some XL finger cuts just for the thumb. All right, let's do our disassembly. I'm so excited that that crystal was the right one. I really should do like more measurements. Because it's, okay, now that I think about it, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I want to make sure that all of those metal shelves are exactly the same. I trust my eye, but I think I trust the micrometer more. Caliper. Caliper. Okay. 29.4. 29.44. And then the inner ring. 28.45. $28.46. And then outer. Outer doesn't really matter all that much. The gasket rides on the inner. 3109. $31.09. Beautiful. Let's check the focus. Pretty good. Pretty. That was smooth. Yeah, sometimes you see this sort of wear on the minute wheel. See how it's got a whole lot of circles on there? So yeah, that sort of circular wear is pretty common. And that typically is going to be caused by the hour wheel. Sometimes the bridge, sometimes both. So yeah. Usually if it's the hour wheel, it does a different sort of pattern on there. It'll do one that has an outline of a gear, which is kind of cool to me. Nobody else? So this one was probably from the bridge. Yeah, just a slight amount of wear on the set gear post. We've seen them so bad though that like we've had to sleeve them. Sometimes you're better off just like reposting it. So there's just a bit of brass showing there. It's not that bad. Wow, that was pretty tight for a little screw. It's really nice. I can't express enough how important it is to have your screwdriver fit the slot. If you're finding yourself working on a watch and you're struggling and it's slipping, I suggest and highly recommend that you spend some more time getting the blade dialed for what it is you're working on. Yeah, so far it's not swimming with oil and grease. Okay, I'm gonna put my finger on this while I lift. Just in case the yoke spring wants to get away. No, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, this was probably over-oiled. There's remnants of old oil. So even though I'm not seeing the liquid oil, I'm seeing where it had dried up. Yeah, they're a little bit sticky. All right, we're gonna get a grasp on this spring. It's not very common to find one in that sort of orientation. Kind of interesting. Okay. Out with the detent and out with the detent pusher. Nope, not yet. The bridge is holding it in. So far everything's pretty decent. Well, that is the dial side. Okay, right off the bat, I'm going to pull these two screws and see if there's a difference. Let's check my theory. No huge problems yet. Yeah, I don't really expect or suspect there will be. Okay, here again. Yeah, okay, so this is what I'm talking about. You want to make sure that the screwdriver doesn't wiggle like that. If it does, it's just not suitable for the screw head. Okay, and that one is too thick. So, we'll take Old Faithful and grind it down a bit. It's gonna be noisy, so I'm gonna mute it. Okay. A little bit more. It's still loose. Ooh, it's very close to perfect. I just want to go one touch more. I won't mute this time. I was being gentle with it, so it wouldn't scream your ears out. Hard steel really doesn't like abrasive things. It screams and moans, and it can be very aggressive to eardrums. It's like nails on a chalkboard. Yeah, okay. That's all there was to this. Just slightly different thicknesses in the head itself. One is a bridge screw, one is a balance bridge screw. Oof, not the stone, yeah. And here I am going to put it back in. I don't need to put it back in. We're taking it apart. Let's get the balance assembly out, and then we'll get the mainspring and gear train out. Very nice. Really smooth. This watch has got hacking, huh? There's a little stop lever here. And it's interesting because that's where our stem comes in. Curious to get this bridge up to see how that works. But also, I really want to take a look at this crown wheel. This is really going to be sparkling after a good cleaning. Personally, not used to seeing this amount of decoration on an older Seiko. Haven't seen a lot of Seikos, I guess. I mean, you're not wrong. A lot of older Seikos, even newer Seikos, aren't really dressed up. Okay, that fits real nice. But I think this is a reverse thread screw. Let's wiggle it first. There we go. A little bit of a wiggle got it to loosen up. It's not a reverse thread screw. Yeah, a little bit of grease showing, but not a big deal. A little divot on the other side. Kind of odd. It's definitely more than most, even more than you'd see on a 4520. Yeah, like this ratchet wheel, for example. Would you see this level of detail work? Probably not. Yeah, these are just tight. They are tight. Wow. I don't know why they would have tightened them that much. This one I cracked the seal and it's still tight. I wonder if that deformity is now gonna lift. I wonder if it's no longer concave. Yeah. It's slightly there, but you can't really notice. Not like you could before. Let's get that bridge up. Oh, interesting. So the gear train itself, the bridge for the gear train has its own set of screws. These ones are thinner like the balance bridges. That makes a lot of sense to me if you're trying to make a very high precision, very high consistency watch. So really it would matter when you go to service the watch, right? What happens when people mix up all the screws? Then your consistency is going to be off. At least as it would be set from the factory. The reason I'm thinking that is it's possible I mean, no matter how well you make the screws, there's going to be slight variation between them. And if you're really splitting hairs, if you're really trying to go for fractions of a second, it makes sense in my mind to make sure that the gear train is going to be as consistent as it can be. See, normally bridge screws are practically going to be bridge screws. You would be able to mix and match screws that are coming from your mainspring bridge as well as your gear train bridge, unless there's specific design considerations, such as like maybe you have a different complication coming in where it does something else. Say it's a micro rotor or something like that. You might have, say, a longer screw on, or a deeper headed screw for one end of the bridge, you know, to accommodate something specific. Like if it was a Rolex, for example, you know, like this screw might be a little bit deeper. Spec on this watch is tightest on any balance wheel wristwatch ever made. Almost. So with that in mind, at least that's my, that's the way the cogs are turning in my head. Okay, let's check out Grease City. It is snug. So let's do this. Take a look around with that part number, see if you hit anything. You can buy them from Japan, but shipping will be long and expensive. Yeah, that was my thought as well. Okay, nail number 2. There we go. Was a worthy sacrifice. Yeah, pretty schmutzy. This is a barrel that I'll or a mainspring that I'll probably run through twice. We've seen worse, but you know. Dark, oh my. Indeed. Okay, I want to see what is up with that crown wheel. There might just be nothing, you know? It just might be like they really torqued down those screws. I just don't get why they would do that. Sometimes there's a metal spacer. But it's usually used as a shim to provide the correct tolerance. Sometimes it's used as a consumable. So they would want the spacer to take the wear instead of the bridge. But in this case, it's probably a slight difference in tolerance between this crown wheel plate and the screw heads themselves. That, or there was a spacer here at some point, which brought up the height, which allowed you to really tighten these screws without deforming this plate. But the tolerance with this is like, it's almost press fit. And if there is a gap, it is very, very small. Oh, you know what? I think I got it. I think this was put in backwards. I'll bet you that was it. Okay, I can see a gap here now. All right, let's take a look at what it is I'm showing here. Don't drop anything while I'm gone. Okay. So this was really tight. I'm surprised that those screws held up, and then I realized that I think they have steel inserts for the threads. So they're not riding in brass. But what I want you to look at is the gap between there. So it might look like this is perfectly symmetrical, but notice that gap right there. And if I tweak this to the side, you can see that there's a gap there as well. But it's the same gap that I see here as over here. Now, watch when I spin this around. I've mentioned before that if you notice that the screws don't want to immediately go into the thread, it might be worthwhile to flip it around, at least to give it a shot. Yeah, that closed the gap. Let's do that. I don't know if I'm still holding it at the right angle. looks like there's a gap, but it felt better. I don't know. We're gonna try this out when we put it back together. The first thing I did was I wiggled this wheel to see if it was free, and it was. Because sometimes if I saw that, I would be concerned that it was putting too much pressure on this wheel. I am seeing some bridge wear here. I want to take a better look at this after cleaning. It's possible that there is too much play in this wheel. It's kind of strange to me that there is a ridge here. See, the back of this wheel is machined flat. But this bridge has 3 different steps. The outside is the lowest step. The middle one comes up slightly, and the top one is what we saw this crown wheel plate to go on. So this keeps the wheel down, but it also limits the amount of end shake or tolerance that the wheel can have and experience. So if this was slightly too high, it would allow for there to be too much play in this wheel. So what I would expect to see is wear on this middle step. I wouldn't want to see wear on the bottom step, and I am seeing wear on the bottom step. If it were me, I would be thinking about just taking this down a little bit. But before I would do that, I definitely want to try this bridge both ways. I want to try this both ways, and if it still doesn't sit down flat on top of that, and if the wheel has too much play, the way of reducing the play would be to slightly take down this ridge so that this would sit lower. But that is definitely something I would sleep on. I don't like to do things knee-jerk. Okay, let's get the gear train out. The mainspring bushings look pretty decent. So here's the start of our stop lever. You see it all the way over here? I'm curious to see what's going on under this bridge. It feels really smooth and effortless. That's great. Is that place something that would make the watch unsafe to run? What I want to do is I want to check out the play in this wheel. With this wheel having too much play, it would lead to further bridge wear. You see that bottom step, how it's got just about half a circle all the way around that outside edge. What that suggests to me is that the middle step isn't preventing the wheel itself from contacting that bottom step. So the teeth of the crown wheel are actually rubbing on that bottom step, and that's how that sort of wear was created. It's adjustable, but I suspect that this was probably just put in 180 degrees the other way. Okay, so this one has a deeper screw hole. This one has what looks to be, actually maybe both of these are deeper. Yeah, no, it's just, there's one screw here that goes down deeper. Hey, Cody, thanks for the raid. Welcome, welcome. How we doing? Y'all came at the perfect time. Perfect time. We are working on an actual unicorn of a watch. Pretty interesting story behind it. So, the Emperor of Japan, 1970, decides he wants to make a European tour. First time the Japanese emperor has left the island of Japan in ever. So what was, sort of orchestrated and planned was that he was going to be giving gifts to heads of state and government stuff and people like that. But he also wanted to have some gifts to give to people that were personal to him. Somebody that helped him, somebody that he felt he wanted to give something to personally. This watch was one of those gifts. We don't know how many of them were made. Seiko didn't make any records of these, but we know they exist because they're real. As far as we know, there's 4. 4 of these. So what makes it different from any other Seiko? Well, there were 100 of these movements. 100? Maybe a few more. This movement is a Seiko VFA. It stands for Very Fine Adjustment. At the time, this was the most accurate mechanical watch in existence. So they really went above and beyond to knock everybody out of the park. Like, actually, they blew the doors off Swiss, you know, just completely no holds barred. Best estimates are 100 or less 4580 VFAs made, but we don't know for sure. And that's the thing, the test of time. If that was like 100 made at the time, there's most likely less now, right? Hey, as soon as I saw you were fixing a watch, I was hooked. This is incredible. Welcome in. Made in 71, remained the most accurate mechanical watch ever made until the mid-2010s. Chat, this is pretty epic. Like, this is a legendary timepiece. But then it's just even more so, you know? It's like, you've got the sweetest cake in the world, and then you have this little cherry that goes on the top of it. That's what this is. So you can get yourself a Seiko VFA. You can buy one. They're available. This isn't. I mean, not unless, you know, the seas part and this shining sunshine ray comes down and you just, you know, it's just one of those stories. All of the luck was used up when this was acquired. Okay, but here we have it. This is how you know it's from the Emperor of Japan. You're not going to see any other Seikos with this logo on there. You might think there are some. You might see this on something. Odds are it's a knockoff. Odds are it's a copy, it's a fake. They just don't exist. These weren't made in double digits, as far as we know. I would gather maybe 5 or 6 tops. We know of 4. Maybe it's only 4. That's definitely a possibility. Welcome. Thank you for the raid. Welcome in, everybody. How are we all doing? How did it end up on your table? Just even more luck, you know? It's just the story of this watch. Odds are this is the first time it's been serviced since 1982. April of 1982. The 12th of April. It was a rainy night. No, I'm just kidding. How do I know that? Because we have this. This is the case back. A lot of times, case backs, when they're serviced, they're etched. The watchmaker will scribe a mark into the back. And that's what we see right there. Let's get a better look at it. So one was March 1977, April 1982. So what are the rest of the numbers before? I don't know, man. Your guess is as good as mine. Probably a job number. There's an EX 2345 EX. Yeah, that's probably work in, work out, right? So in a few years, they put a few more thousand on the service numbers? I have no clue. And then the little squiggle at the end is most likely the watchmaker's own sort of like signature. Aside from that, there's only one other mark here. Oh, too much enhance. Looks like an E, another E. Or it could be a symbol. I don't actually know. But it certainly looks different than this E. See, you can tell on this one where he drags his E. I say he, but I don't actually know. You know, the top line is sort of drugged down. Oh. This is watch forensics chat, and they did the same thing up here. And they still didn't sharpen their scribe. Oh man. You can tell a few years later that scribe is pretty messed up. Anyway. It's just laziness. I've had to sharpen my scribe a few times. It's not a big deal. You like Seiko Sarbs and of course the Snowflake? Yeah. Snowflake is wildly hyped. I mean, I get it. Like, it's pretty cool. I just don't quite understand why. There's a whole slew of other Grand Seikos, you know? Whole slew of Cradors out there. Okay, the stop lever is pretty ornate. And it's getting hung up on something. I think I just have to keep wiggling. Yeah, it freed up. Illuminati. Making fun of a watchmaker scribing tool 40 years after the job. Of course. Of course. I'm so hypercritical of my own tools, you know? I know what it looks like. And the big reason as to why I'm hypercritical of my tools. I don't do things, you know, really willy-nilly. Okay, some things. Some, for sure. Just keeping it real, you know? I think I'm going to do a separate basket for the mainspring and the winding pinion because the ratchet wheel takes up all of that basket pretty much. And these little baskets are going to go in a bigger basket, which has a bigger basket, yet no, I'm just kidding. That's where it stops. And ultrasonic vibrates the heck out of all of this. So the particles, the schmutz in the watch, gets, you know, sucked down with gravity, just like everything else. And with that big old ratchet wheel on the bottom, that ratchet wheel would come out dirty. Much like that cap would. Luckily, I have more baskets. Yeah. kind of a basket case right here. I shared with you guys yesterday that I was going to stay with a friend, and they're still kind of coming back from the grief of losing their wife. And there was a lot that they left on the wayside. There was a lot that just didn't matter, you know. If you've never had a loved one that was sick, it's difficult to really fathom that all you're ever really thinking of is that person. And then when they pass, that doesn't stop. You kind of get caught in a rut. And yeah, I was just helping mainly to de-stress. I was just doing the stuff, you know, the things that were left neglected. But yeah, it just turned out to be more than I had anticipated. Anyway, we've got a little bit of rust. We've got a bit of rust. Everything was going so smooth. Everything looked pretty decent. And then we ran into this. Might be a dumb question. How do you know how it goes back together? Practice, memory, a little bit of both. It's hard to imagine that something like this can be second nature, but it really just shows the adaptability of humans. And also, we all have our talents. That's the thing. One of my talents is that, well, it really was just a voracious curiosity as to how things work, how machines work. So ever since I could articulate my hands, I was always trying to get inside of my toys and things like that. And after taking apart thousands of watches, it just sort of becomes just another thing, you know? It just becomes another machine. But let me tell you, the novelty doesn't wear off. To me, I love this, you know? It's just one of those things where this will never get boring for me or old. But then again, I'm easily amused, so that also helps. Okay, so that wheel meshes with that one. This might be grease. Let's see what the polarizer tells us. It's not lighting up on the polarizer. I think this just might be grease. So why does this grease look so funky? It's old. It's like old grease. Let's see what the polarizer does on this. Yeah, this really isn't lighting up like it would be for rust. what the polarizer does on this microscope here is it'll make rust glow. Like it'll look red, like glowing red. And this doesn't really glow like rust does on the camera here. Sorry if this is a little shaky. I'm kind of just holding it in place. Yeah, so what I suspect is that this is a mix of grease and metal particulate. So why do we have metal particulate on this wheel, or excuse me, pinion? And we don't on any of the others. The reason is, if you look at these wheels, these are brass. Fourth wheel, center wheel, second wheel, third wheel, and our escape wheel, which just has some of that schmutz that fell on top of it. The reason is because this pinion meshes with this wheel right here, and that wheel is steel. So that's why that pinion's all schmutzy and the rest of these aren't. Brass has some interesting properties. It's used in wheels a lot, primarily because it's easy to machine. It's easy to machine and it's as strong as it needs to be. We don't need to have titanium wheels in watches. Are there some? Yeah, there are. But also brass is self-lubricating. Kind of trippy, huh? You know what else is self-lubricating that we see in watches? Plastic. Yeah. Just play the VOD in reverse, yeah. Service manuals too, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so for example, if I'm working on a watch that I'm unfamiliar with, even though this is one of them, this one is very simple in terms that it's, doesn't have a lot going on. This watch is time only. It's kind of like weird to say or think about that this is just a timepiece, because so much was put into making it as precise of a timepiece as possible. So I'm not trying to diminish what it is, but watches can do a lot of different things. So we're looking at this one under the microscope here. For an example, it looks like a stopwatch, right? You start the timer and it goes. So what? Well, it's what's known as a split second or a rattrapant. That means you can have two separate timed events that you can record. So just to give you an idea as to, what a complication is. We've got two separate second hands that are able to stop and start independently. Ish. So if I'm working on something that, I'm unfamiliar with. I'll take some pictures. I'll take my time, and I'll take some pictures. What else? Service manuals. What I like to use service manuals for is the part numbers. So if I need to get a replacement part, it saves the part supplier a lot of time if you can just give them a factory part number. Having to describe a part that is like not normal, like not a standard part. Like I listed off these wheels to you, right? That's a center wheel. They're going to know what a center wheel is. They'll be able to find the part number on their own, but it's going to eat some of their own time, and you're not trying to be that guy. You want a good relationship with your parts suppliers because there's not a lot of them anymore. That's really it. You really just want to make their job as simple and as easy as possible. So you do the legwork, and when you're in a bind, they'll do the legwork for you too. So it's you know, mutually beneficial relationship like that. So also, what I really like service manuals for is seeing what kind of lubrication the manufacturer recommends for specific areas. I don't know why it fascinates me so much. Mainly it's to see the different versions. So occasionally manufacturers will update their service manuals. And sometimes what that means is that they just add a little bit of color. But a lot of times what it means is that they will change a recommendation for a lubricant. Sometimes they find that, oh, something better came out, and now we're no longer going to recommend that old thing anymore. We're going to recommend that new thing. But occasionally, in rare circumstances, we find that they'll actually change a part. They'll come out with an updated part for a specific area. Sometimes they find that, you know, over the years, they're coming up with a common issue, a common area for wear, and they figure out a better way, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of cool. I don't know. They kind of see your Grail watch in your bio. What's everyone's day-to-day watch? Some marks on the fourth wheel? I don't think so. I think it was just machine marks. It's just a little rough. A little bit of that cruddy grease on there. Not tool marks, but tooling marks. Okay. Let's get the fork out of here. That's pretty cool. Look at how they machined these two side reliefs on the fork where it would be touching the banking pins. This kind of reminds me of old pocket watches that would do funky little mustaches for their for the pallet forks. But this, where those, it was based off of like a suspicion. The suspicion was that forks need to be balanced. So front to back, they thought that they could have maybe an advantage making something more precise if the fork itself was balanced front to back. It really doesn't matter, as it turns out. But it's really fun to see those. I don't know why, but it tickles me. But this right here, no doubt, is absolutely functional. So they bevel the edge. Why do they do that? I suspect why they do that is because the surface area, the contact point of the pallet fork itself. So when it's going off of the banking pins, there might be some resistance to actually moving. So if you round off that edge, the contact point that it touches on the banking pin is incredibly small. So what are we talking about here? Let's see if I can show you on this one. Yeah, okay. So there's a good angle. Oh, maybe I can't get that far in. So you can see where the fork is contacting the sides. It's banking off of those two pins, hence banking pins. So over time, you know, there's going to be little marks that are left on the pins as well as the fork. That's going to be the contact point of the pin and the fork. So I suspect there is a slight resistance of movement. I don't actually know if this is the case, but seeing that it's done here makes me think that that's probably the case. That's probably why they did it. Now, when you're looking at like older Vacherons or Patek Philippe or Breguet or something, you know, pretty upscale and high-end, a lot of times their forks are stylized. So they have like a whole lot of curves to them. But in this case, this was a very functional adjustment to the fork. This watch is purpose-built to be as precise as possible. So that would go to assume that everything you see here, the whole machine, all of it has a purpose. Every little piece, the way it's done, you know, how it's done, why it's done, all of that is to make this as accurate of a timekeeper as you can. And they did it. They did it. So, and that stood for decades. If that doesn't speak to every little bit here, I don't know what does. Don't know what does. Okay, let's get this last bridge off here. And I think that will be our last basket for it. 6 baskets for a hand-wound time-only watch. You're probably never going to see that again on this channel. Unless this watch comes back for a service. I kind of want to scrub a little bit on that wheel, but here's what I'm going to do. The sensitive bits over here, I'm going to put in a basket. And the bigger steely bits, I'll put in a separate basket. The reason for that is I just don't want them banging around with each other. I don't want the sensitive bits banging around with the rough and tough ones. Yeah. There's a little bit of wear because of this steel piece that got mixed up with some grease. There's a little bit of wear on this center wheel pinion. Let's take a look at it. Put some respect on Seiko's name. Yeah, absolutely. Is this a safety pinion? I guess technically this would be our second wheel. So coming straight off of the mainspring. Right? Yeah. So this is delivering power to our second wheel, but it's an intermediary. So this is taking the most torque. It takes a lot of abuse. And then shortly after that, it's this wheel, which also has a little bit of wear. Where is the wheel? There it is. But this is a rough and tough steely bit. It can take it. A little bit of wear on this one. Determine this is not rust, correct? It's metal particulate. Some of it has mixed with oil, and at that point, it doesn't matter what it is. It's an abrasive. At that point, it accelerates wear. But just for funsies, we'll take a look at this wheel and then turn the polarizer on. It glows a little bit, but if this was raw rust, this would be bright red. But yeah, it's a combination of grease and metal particulate. Center wheel pinion not supposed to be attached to the center wheel. The center wheel goes through it, but it has its own. The bridge, which has a jewel, our center wheel would be going straight through there. Okay. All right. Let's bundle it up. We put the balance assembly back in place for cleaning. The reason for that is this is where it's designed to be, and this is the safest place for it. It is a very fragile piece, very delicate piece. And it's the beating heart of the machine. So we treat it with respect, and it'll keep on ticking. Cucumber okay? Okay, done. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of dogs. Big fan of cucumbers, too. But everything's best in moderation, right? There we go. So, it's always a good idea before you tighten down balance screws, balance bridge screws or balance cock screws, that you make sure that your balance is moving. So give it a little wiggle before you tighten those screws. If you find that it stops moving while you're tightening it, then it's trying to tell you that you're squeezing it too tight. Can we get a look at the balance staff and the jewel? Absolutely. Bob Ross is sad you forgot about him. I mean, I'll take Bob Ross every day. There is an exception to the rule, right? Never too much Bob. All right, that's the heavy bits. The big heavy bits. And the last basket. Yeah, that was pretty interesting to see about the fork. Bravo, Seiko, bravo. All right, let's put those with these. And this is the watch, ready for cleaning. Let's get a look at our balance wheel. Never made the connection between you and Bob Ross. Excellent artists in their field, both remarkably chill, both teach our audience about their craft. Yeah, people have mentioned it before. I think it's an honor. That is some tight tolerances there, huh? A lot of times you see some breathing room, you know? Mr. H, former drill sergeant 2/S. I mean, I took ROTC, but no. enjoy getting the end shake right. It shouldn't be no problem. So yeah, after cleaning, I like to take the jewels out, give them an extra clean. I'm thinking about using Fix-A-Drop on these. I don't know. Gotta think about it. This one's a little mangled. How was the other one? Is it a little scratched? Oh. They did a better job on this side. They were pretty heavy-handed with their tweezers, though. Don't mind the fuzz. So there you see a balance mark on the wheel. It's where they removed a little bit of material. To make the wheel more balanced. Pretty amazing. Okay, chat. That is gonna be it for me tonight. My sisters came into town, and I haven't seen them in like a month. Still can't believe I found this. You know, it goes to show, like, you put in the effort, and yeah, it pays off. Not always, but you know, we get lucky sometimes. That's really what it is. We get lucky sometimes. Yeah. You used up all of that luck. No, I believe there's a talent to this. The collection that you've put together, to me, it's impressive. I've mentioned it before, like when you sent me some watches at the other shop that like wow, you know, you get good stuff, and you're like, that's subjective, and it's like, yeah, but like I do this for a living, and I've seen other people's collections, you know. I've seen what other people like to collect, and you know, coming in with a box of Invictas, acting like you need to be handcuffed to the box is like pretty absurd. Oh, jeez. You're looking over your shoulder like, oh no. It's quite insane. I sincerely think my collection is the best watch collection in the world. Largely because it's exactly my taste. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a pretty cool, pretty sweet collection. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to keep them going, you know? Keep them going for the long haul. Yeah. As always, it's a pleasure. Okie dokie. We'll be back with it tomorrow, all sparkly and ready to be put back together. I want to take a look into the part number 012720. Yeah, I mean, they say this one is even used. That's funny. Return goods? Impossible. Oh, man. Okay. Where are we? Where are we at? Should we give somebody a raid? Pass on the raid love? Or do we just end it? I think there's a lot of sleepers in chat. I don't want to disturb anybody. We will just end it. Appreciate all the follows. Holy smokes. Sorry I didn't get the opportunity of thanking all of you. I really do appreciate it though. And for Cody for bringing all of you fine folk over. Much appreciated. All right. Tune in tomorrow, probably around the same time, maybe 3, 4 o'clock, somewhere in there. PST. And we'll put it back together. Get it oiled right and, you know, give it a little TLC. Scrub behind the ears. Let me know if you're fine with those screws. Certainly willing to buy from Japan if that's the best option. What I'll do is I'll go through some of the same Seiko line sizes because I'm pretty sure I've got some of those screws. I don't imagine that, you know, they made some special thread for, you know, these dial screws. Anything Seiko in the 70s with the same line size should carry those screws, but I don't know that for sure. But yeah, I do have probably a few more Seikos in the same line size. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Sleep well and stay cool.